What's up, guys? Welcome back. Today we're talking about something I'm very excited about because I've been trying to get my hands on one of these for quite some time. This is the Krein Alpha, made by Tom Krein. It's a custom knife maker. These are really hard to get because he only does two-ish a week, maybe, sometimes less, sometimes more. All handmade by Tom Krein, who you might have heard of in the past. He makes just the Alpha as a folder. He makes some fixed blades. I'm not super familiar with them. I'm not a big fixed blade guy. And then he does a bunch of regrinds. So what you'll see in the world of knives is you'll see like a PM2 or something with a Krein regrind. He's known for his grind. And you'll see his logo. You can see the logo right here stamped on those blades. So you might be familiar with the logo from those regrinds. But this is his own handmade folding model called the Alpha. And the only way to get them is on the secondary or by winning a lotto, being able to buy one. So you enter his lottos on his Facebook group, and he selects someone from the list to get to buy it. It's kind of a funny way to buy things. Hey, you get the privilege to buy something. It makes sense though when they're this desirable. So I've been trying to get one for a long time. Obviously you can get them on the secondary, but they're always much more expensive than the table price, which is already not cheap. And so I finally got selected by Tom to purchase this one. First, before I get into it, there's a lot I want to talk about with this knife. Let's do some size comparisons. First, we've got the PM3. As you can see, it is almost identical in size to the PM3. Very, very close. The perspective of the camera always makes things look a little bigger when they're at the bottom, but very close to the PM3. The PM2, much smaller than the PM2. And then last but not least, and this will make sense why I'm doing this, actually last but probably most, the Rosie. It is literally identical in size to the Rosie. Sorry, I had out of frame. Tip to tip, butt to butt, like identical in size. So that's important for some of the things I'm going to be talking about, which will be clear in a minute. This one, he does a bunch of different grinds. This one is the chisel grind with the Tonto, my favorite config. Actually, he does, standard drop point, he does scanning grind, he does, hollow grind, he does all this stuff. They just are whatever config he decides he wants to do. I really like the way he does Tontos. I'm a big fan of Tontos. That's what I have in my pocket most of the time. These are a Nitro V steel. Nitro V steel is a solid steel. You see it mostly in the custom world, the handmade custom world. It's easier to work with than the crazy super steels we have these days. It's a little bit softer. It's it's close to AEBL, which was a popular steel back in the day as well, but a little bit harder. It's not a super steel by any means, but is acceptable in my mind. And steels is a whole other conversation we could have. So why am I excited about this knife? What is the deal with this knife? What is exciting about this knife in general? It looks very simple. Maybe you're like, okay, you waited that long for a knife that looks like a CRKT squid? Well, to be 100% honest, when I got this, when I opened the box and looked at it, I was like, wow, that's simple. I mean, that was my first impression. Underwhelming, right? You open the box when you get like a Rosie, and it's very kind of striking in some ways, right? Little frame lock, cool finishing details, blah, blah, blah. You open the box when you get something like what's been in my pocket constantly, the McStrider Custom, you're like, holy crap, that is a knife, right? The Alpha does not have that experience. Mostly because, like I said, it's pretty simple. There's not anything crazy going on with this knife, but as soon as you get it in your hand, you realize the attention to detail and the finishing on this knife. This is not an exaggeration. This might be the most perfectly finished knife I have ever seen, I've ever handled. Finished, so let me make a definite or give you the definition for what I mean by finished. I mean every detail on this knife is exactly what Tom Krein meant it to be. Examples. If you look, so these scales are it's called a hot chili pepper micarta, which is cool. These come with a COA and a pouch and stuff. If you look at where the scales meet the liners, every single edge of these scales meeting the liners is perfectly lined up. And I mean perfectly, where when I do this, I don't feel any of these ridges. I only feel the texture difference between the micarta and the titanium. There are literally no discernible ridges. The chamfering on every edge is perfect. The centering is absolutely perfect. The action is completely locked. Every edge, I'm not exaggerating. The hole for the pivot, there's no wiggle room there. It is perfectly set in there. No wiggle room for the handle screws. The pocket clip has the perfect retention for any style pants. I'm shocked by that. Like it's pretty amazing. I've carried this with sweatpants and jeans, and it perfectly retains. The action, it looks like it's spring loaded, and it drops shut but doesn't guillotine because of this perfect detail of a tiny little kick out at the base of the blade. It catches your nail no matter where your nail is, and is a tiny detail that is perfect. The lock bar access with a little swedge perfectly guides you in. I did the thumb flick. It also reverse flicks. It looks like it is spring loaded. This runs on bearings, which is kind of one of my only little nitpicks on this. Everything about this knife is perfectly executed. There is no detail missed, no detail ignored, and it is a knife for a knife enthusiast. A normal person probably wouldn't notice these little things, but as a knife collector, you nitpick and you notice little things. You're like, oh, well, this isn't great, this isn't great. It is actually shocking how perfect this is, because these are all handmade too. These aren't stamped out, these aren't CNC'd, which nothing wrong with the CNC knife. I have a Brown Mini FSDI that I absolutely love, but that's the majority of CNC knife. And CNC, it's easier to get those tight tolerances because it's machine made. Tom isn't machine making these, he's hand making these. Obviously there's machines involved, but they're not CNC knives. So the level of perfection on this knife is shocking. And again, there's nothing super fancy about the knife. It's a tried and true shape. It's a tried and true, liner lock, which actually I have some thoughts on that I'll tell you in a minute. It's, a standard thumb stud deployment, dual thumb studs, which is nice. It's micarta handles, which are also nice. I actually love micarta. Some people hate it, but I love micarta. I love a good finished micarta. Everything on this knife, perfect. Just perfectly finished. There are some things that I would personally like different, but they're very few. I can't say anything bad about the finishing or how Tom built this. I truly can't find anything wrong with it. Which, I've handled a lot of knives, and that's pretty surprising. So let's talk about those a couple things that are that I would maybe change. And then in order to get other negative things, I have to compare it to something else, and that's why I have the Rosie on the table. And then at that point, it's not a really fair comparison, but that's how good this is. If you have been in the knife world at all, you kind of know that the Rosie is the king of the small knife these days. And in order to just go mano a mano with the Rosie, the knife has to be excellent, because the Rosie is excellent. So first off, one quote unquote negative thing, or people might find negative, is the width. This is a super wide knife, and that's kind of a feature of having a liner and scale, but no exaggeration, is probably 1 third, 33% wider than the Rosie, maybe a little bit more. um, Good bit wider than the PM2. I would say a quarter wider than the PM2. These are contoured carbon scales. It is maybe a third, maybe a quarter wider than the PM3. It is actually wider than the SMF that I've been carrying. Which this is a 4-inch blade. This is a beefcake of a knife. It's not the blade is the size of the Alpha. So this is not a small knife. So it is fat. But, I looked at that and I was like, that's interesting. And then I started holding it and it makes sense. It feels really good in your hand. It's actually, I would say that it's intentional of Tom, because if it was narrower because of the way the ergos are set up on this knife, it would feel not good in your hand. It fills the hand nicely. And I don't mind it at all. You don't notice it in your pocket because it's such a small knife already. Another thing is actually jimping. I would like jimping on the spine, but he kind of accomplishes that in his own way by having a ramp on the spine. I don't feel insecure back here at all. The ramp does accomplish what jimping accomplished, which is a tiny bit of extra grip at the top, and I don't actually mind that. If you're wondering what I mean by that, the Rosie does this really well, but it's got a flat spine. The Rosie's jimping is great. The last thing on the quote-unquote negatives list would be the weight. It's not a light knife. This knife comes in at just about 4 ounces, but that's kind of a nature of the liner construction with micarta scales. I'm not really worried about that. 4 ounces is not heavy in the knife world. It's not light though. That's just how it is. You can't really mill scales and liners out. So, I mean, it makes sense. 4 ounces is not, like I said, not heavy in the knife world, but it's heavy for this size knife, but you're not going to notice it because 4 ounces is still relatively light. Okay, now we have to do something because of the perfection of this knife. Oh, also I didn't bring up the thumb studs are absolutely perfect. These are made by someone else, I think, because I have these on another knife. They're very close, but the placement and all that and the grip that you are afforded with them is just excellent, and the knife just flies out. Okay, now we have to compare this to the king of the small EDC world, and that is the Rosie. That's debatable, obviously. All of these are opinions, but I'd say that the Rosie has taken the world by storm and is kind of considered, one of the best small knives out there, if not ever made, and for good reason. It's an excellent knife. What does this do worse than the Rosie? Well, not a lot. I mean, they're very comparable. The main noticeable thing is the ergonomics, right? The Rosie has ergonomics that are kind of wizardry. It's kind of the Mary Poppins bag of ergonomics. I've handed this to people with huge hands and small hands, and they all say it is extremely comfortable, right? You are, as long as you go to this one position, you can't really go back on a Rosie. It's all, you have to be in the front shoulder, which is totally fine. I'm fine with one hand position. We don't need 10 hand positions with small EDCs. The Alpha is different because you do not have a front choil, and that's like the main comparison you can make. You hold back. It fills the palm nicely, though. It's just a little bit further back. You might get a little bit less control. You could hold it here. Not a big fan of doing that because it feels a little close to the blade, but I'm not mad at that. Then the other thing, you compare the Rosie, I already brought this up, is the thinness. The Rosie is nice and thin. It disappears in the pocket. This is much thicker, obviously, but it also disappears in the pocket. The other thing that could be brought up would be that this is a liner lock instead of a frame lock. Honestly, I think that knives this size probably should be liner locks usually, because there's nowhere to put your hand in order to avoid the frame lock. And when a knife is susceptible to lock bar pressure when deploying it, it makes it a pain in the butt to deploy these small knives. That being said, the Rosie is somehow built to not be susceptible to lock bar pressure, and it's a knife that, so you can, thumb roll it easily, but this is also a knife that's supposed to be reverse flaked. So, I mean, that's kind of point to the Alpha for being a liner-like lock because it's easy to deploy, but point to the Rosie for not being susceptible to lock bar pressure. But that, that's kind of a witchcraft thing too that the Rosie does that you don't see in a lot of knives. When a knife is susceptible to lock bar pressure, you kind of have to relearn how to open it. What other things can we compare? Well, the blade shape, obviously, this is going to be a less slicey blade. The Rosie has a very slicey blade that makes it cutting packages really nice. This is a thicker blade stock, but honestly, with this blade shape, I like Tonto's. This is excellent, perfect for draw cuts. I really like this on boxes and such. And the flat is really nice for just cutting through things in general. It's not going to be as slicey as the Rosie. Blade steels are obviously something we can compare. The Rosie's Magna Cut, the Alpha's Nitro V. I'm sorry that I've had these upside down. That seems silly. The Rosie's Magna Cut, the Alpha is Nitro V. Nitro V is not a super steel. Like I said, it's much softer. And Magna Cut is kind of one of those super steels. It holds its edge a really long time. The benefit of Magna Cut is you don't have to maintain as often. The benefit of Nitro V that it's easier to maintain, right? So if you're someone that doesn't like to stroke or sharpen your knives or whatever, then the Rosie would be better for you. If you are that person, I strongly encourage you to learn at least stropping your knives, because the cutting performance of all your knives will greatly increase. But I also think that the focus on super steels is a little bit excessive these days. The majority of us are not going to bring a knife to its absolute limits of the steel it's using. So again, that's kind of like personal preference. The other thing that the Rosie does, quote unquote, better is the looks of the pocket clip, I think. Hidden hardware on a pocket clip is badass, but the functionality of the Alpha pocket clip is actually better, in my opinion. It just, the tension and all that stuff. The standoff on the pocket clip might look a little weird on the Alpha, but it's not. It's purely a functional thing, and you will love it if you have it in your pocket. The pivot on the Rosie is a little bigger. These are non-proprietary pivots. You can purchase these. I've seen them on other knives. They both have uncaptured pivots, which is but the thing is that with these knives, they come so perfectly set up. You're not going to take it apart right away, and you're probably not going to take it apart often, right? Because these knives are precision made and really just absolutely perfect out of the box. So I'm not as worried about a non-captured pivot, God forbid, a proprietary pivot, if your knife doesn't have to be taken apart very often, right? So, I mean, I struggled. I've been thinking about this video since I got this knife on Monday this week. I struggled to find anything wrong with the Alpha. It is a knife that's kind of lived up to its hype, actually exceeded the hype, because I got it in hand, and I've been just looking at the little details of it, and every time I look more, I'm like, wow, that Tom really thought this out. The way that Tom has been able to accomplish this too is something that I very much appreciate about him, and that is that he's been building the Alpha, and only the Alpha, as a folder. He might have done a couple others, but I'm pretty sure he's only built the Alpha as a folder for years. He has mastered the Alpha model, and each one of these is completely handmade. He obviously pays really close attention to the details. They are so handmade to the point where Alphas cannot have their scale swapped, because each scale is ground perfectly to the knife. And I saw that example, I showed that example with the edges on this knife with the transitions. So Tom really has mastered the model of the Alpha. He's done what Chris Reeve does with their knives, where they make one model, or in the case of Chris Reeve, they make 5 models, but I know they make more, but they've been making the same 5 models basically since 2005. And Tom's been making knives for a really long time too. Not as long as Chris Reeve, but really a well-seasoned knife maker that absolutely cares about his craft. He is extremely detail-oriented, and I very much appreciate every piece of that. So those are some things about the Alpha, kind of my first impressions. It is a really, really freaking impressive knife. The Rosie might have some more crowd pleasers, like it might be the more everyman's knife, but to me, the Alpha has enough things that I really like and enough things like slightly over the Rosie that might consider the Alpha my new favorite small carry. And I've been really enjoying carrying it. So let me know your favorite small carry in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on comparing these two knives. I couldn't find another way to find anything negative about this knife. The review would have been, oh, here's the Alpha, it's perfect. You know, that would have been the review. So I felt like I had to compare it to another master class in knife making, which is the Oz Roosevelt, and really widely loved by the whole community. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you on the next one.